Mach 3, give me Crucio on 2, 3, and 4.
Line 1, exit 1.
6, 3. Mach 3, give me start line 2.
5 electric. Mach 3. Line 1 up.
Mach 3, give me start line 1 and Crucio on 7 and 9.
Line 1, Crucio 79, Mach 2.
Yeah, do something. I hate weapons.
Super up, line 3, red ball, avionics.
Super Ops. Line 7 is code 3 for light in the gear handle.
Fuck. Hey, so I started a Patreon because frankly, this stuff's getting expensive. Nothing will change the podcast or the blog if you don't subscribe, but if you want early access to episodes, monthly AMAs, episode shoutouts, voting on podcast topics, and all kinds of 20 Years Done gear, head over to patreon.com/20yearsdone. This month's top tier Patreon shoutout goes to Kevin Traw, Robbie Walker, Travis Barnes, JT Owens, and Delinda Baker. Thanks for the support. Okay, so today I'm joined by Eric Stromski, who has joined me on multiple episodes: careerism, compliance culture, the QA discussion. Were you there for the flight chief discussion too?
No, not that one.
I didn't give a fuck of what your thoughts were on flight chief and
No, and I tell you the truth, I wasn't a flight chief for very long, so
yeah,
I wouldn't help too much on that one.
That's fair. So it's been a while, huh?
Yeah, it's been a little bit.
Yeah, I had way better guests on, so that's why I never.
Yeah, I get it. I don't blame you.
No, I'm just kidding. Actually, I was telling Eric, like the best performing episode I have on the podcast is the episode that him and Ashley did for careerism, where we just basically deconstructed how the Air Force promotes the wrong people all the fucking time and focuses on the wrong shit. So, but after some of the recent episodes, Eric wanted to share his thoughts on stuff.
Yeah, you watching your episodes, right? So it really brings up. I mean, like I told you before, I wish I could pause your episode and reach out into the middle of it, because every episode you do, I'm sure many feel the same way I do. I can just relate to the certain topic you're talking about, or have my own take on what you're discussing. You could list probably 1,000 podcast titles. There's so many different things to talk about in every aspect, and you can break one category down. You take leadership, for example. You could break that down into 50 podcasts probably just on leadership alone. So I wanted to reach out to you, and we'll hit up a few different topics here and just general thoughts. I mean, your podcasts are pretty specific to one topic, but sometimes I feel like you got to have a smorgasbord of small topics, right?
Well, I think that's kind of what's going on. Like if you look at the progression of the podcast, I mean, obviously it started not as a podcast. There's a pandemic, and I want to get some people together just to talk generally about what we learned in the Air Force, and then we transitioned that to a podcast. So if you're new to the podcast and you're like, man, this shit sounds great, well, go back and listen to like the first 4 or 5 episodes where I'm sitting on a Logitech gaming headset, and we're all on one audio track, and there's no audio. I need to go back and fucking audio engineer those. I feel bad that I'm afflicting people with that bad audio.
Nah, you got to leave them. They're OG podcasts.
Yeah, it might be a record player, like a manual record player you crank at weird speeds. But I kind of look back at it's very similar to the blog, where the blog began telling stories about events in my career of these were good leaders, these were bad leaders, this is where I made this decision, this is how I made this decision, and I didn't know what it was when I was making it. And it really eventually culminated in the story that I reference probably at least every other podcast of, on 20yearsdone.com, smoke doesn't always mean fire, where it was really, I was trying to explain how I was prepared for that scenario. And here's all the leadership lessons I learned along the way, and I can see how all of them apply. And I had the tools at that moment in my mind, and there's probably at least one particular person out there or two that think that I was not a noble person or not at the moral high ground. But then it transitioned to critique of the Air Force. I had the crisis in aircraft maintenance, where I really kind of took some of that background and rolled it into a broader topic. And I feel like the podcast is similar, where I've been kind of compartmentalizing these individual, very narrow issues in the Air Force. But especially recently with episode 30 and 31 with Mike, we were talking about maintenance culture in general. I feel like a lot of those issues we were working through, like me and you with compliance culture and careerism and how it rewards the wrong characteristics in leadership and volunteerism. And all of those contribute to the Air Force culture in general, but also maintenance culture specifically. So I think recently it's just been trying to tie all of those loose threads together. And I think that's where I'm going to be for a little bit, I guess.
Well, and there's a lot of threads, right, to tie
Yep.
together. I mean, like I told you, you could break one category down or one specific topic, and how it relates to other career fields in the Air Force, how it relates to other branches of the military. I mean, how it could even relate to what people do, as civilians. Like you take a Boeing, right? Boeing has a flight line, and they have, like up here in Seattle, there's a ton of Boeing right outside, and a lot of those guys are ex-military, and like a flight line's a flight line, right? There's a lot more different rules for civilians than there are for military, but it could equate that all this stuff is relatable to a lot more different people than just maintenance in the Air Force, and especially specifically, F-16 flight line maintenance.
So much of what episode 30 and 31 was me kind of walking through a lot of regret that I had in my behavior and trying to take responsibility for it, which goes to, if you look at, and I have now matured as a podcaster. I keep my episode list up so that way I don't just blindly stab at episode numbers when I quote them. I'll actually say the episode number for those listening for their benefit. But episode 15 with Scott Frisco and Toxic Leadership, that was me admitting that I had caused him a lot of harm and then emphatically apologizing. And I was very clear that it was, I am sorry for what I did to you. And I don't think there's a good excuse. And I understand that it was needlessly hurtful. So part of what the last couple episodes was really working through, like, yeah, I contributed to this, but also like I'm taking responsibility for it. But what helped mold me into the person that ended up ultimately being abusive? But looking at it in the culture of maintenance, it seemed fairly normal if I just wasn't a little bit better skilled at shitting on people, right?
Right.
My behavior, besides the fact a few outbursts here and there, was pretty normal, right?
Well, run of the mill, right? Like you're, as you grow up in that culture and your leadership styles. We've all been to the ALSs and the NCO academies, and they talk about leadership, but your leadership style is really ingrained to you years before you go to those ALSs and the academies, right? It's taught to you by example, and we all talk about the old crusties that were in well before us, and people will talk about us like we're the old crusties well before them. It's passed down from generation to generation, and specifically, the flight line alone, that is like the toughest place to work. You always alluded to how you got to have this really thick skin. I think there needs to be a serious shift in how people consider what they consider to be a leader and how they're presenting that to the people below them, because it gets passed down. So if you don't make a change somewhere, somehow, and, you realize, you and I, after 20 years of career, we realized we made some huge mistakes, right? We could have done things a little different. And even at the time, we probably knew it. We probably knew like, hey, this isn't the way to treat someone. This isn't the way to get the best out of the people below us. And I think that's one of the biggest charges that you're supposed to, as a leader, to be able to get the best out of the people below you. You need to pull it out of them, right? Some are shyer, some are harder to get to, some it comes natural to, right? And you have to grow them into your position because we're not there anymore. So what I essentially feel like what happened to us is we may have left a bunch of people behind us that we now understand is not correct, right? Were we good leaders? Did we show these people that there's different ways to lead and to, just to even treat a human being in general, right? Like sometimes I know we definitely, in the pro super office alone, we really got into some people's shit, right? And a lot of times I feel like it was more for fun almost than growing or grooming that airman or staff sergeant or whatever it is.
Yeah.
We talk about things we would have done different. I think back to a few times where, just the amount of beratement that you put someone through, standing in front of your desk and giving them hell, that's acceptable. But let me tell you what, it doesn't work. It definitely doesn't work.
Much of my abuse and toxicity I initially attributed to being in production. That was something that I thought I had identified very early, well, not early, but in my production stint, I was like, I'm evil in production. I'm evil in production. But the reality with the Scott Frisco thing was I was evil outside production. Right.
Right.
And I say evil, not in like the biblical sense, just,
Sure.
like the devil didn't inhabit my body.
Right.
But like I was fucking mean. I was mean spirited, we'll say. And I thought it was production. I think it was certainly exacerbated by production, but it wasn't exclusive to production. But I think very often in production, you see people in a very binary way. Either they're perfect and they produce, or they're imperfect and they don't produce. And for some reason, when they're imperfect and don't produce, it feels like it gives you this license to just fucking blame them for the fact your schedule isn't full. Blame them for being inexperienced. Blame them, and it goes back to, episode 30, talking about it's just an anger dump. You just have this ball and you're just looking for a fucking excuse. And it happens to be that guy standing at your desk, and you just fucking unload it.
Well, and I feel like it's a culmination of there's so many things that are well beyond our capability to change, right? And I cannot change directives from the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. We cannot change Air Force regulation, right? There's certain things we can't change. And years and years of that frustration building up where, you talk about the decline in maintainers, but the sorties staying the same, sortie generation actually upticking.
Yep.
It balls up. I don't know if it was episode 30 or 31, but you talked about how we carry this with us, this anger, and boy, by the time you're in charge of someone, you've had years of this now,
and now authority too, right?
Well, that's right. That's a dangerous
years of like compressed resentment, frustration, and authority.
Right.
Well, that's a good combo, huh?
Oh man, I tell you, if we were cops, we'd be in big trouble, right?
Yeah.
I'll tell you that when you look back, and what the Air Force should be teaching people is realizing that you build and create these different people in the moment, in one specific moment, not necessarily over a month or 2 years of supervision. It's one specific moment at a time. And, we do a terrible job with dealing with our emotions and our problems we have. I know you've talked about going to mental health before, and I think more people should just make it a regular thing, right? You have to go to PT every day to stay fit, right? You have to work out and run and lift weights and whatever you do. Mm-hmm. What do you do for yourself mentally to be able to handle that? And you take all this years of frustration and all this living in the suck, which is part of what makes working on the flight line great.
Yep.
Right.
It builds bonds.
But it also, it splits both ways. But how do you deal with that? Right. How do you deal with the constant stress, the constant push you get from the top down? And then all of a sudden there's airman dumbass in front of your desk that lost the tool, at an hour left to go in your shift, and you explode all over this dude, right? Or gal, right? Those moments is what I think needs to change. And that's probably something that if I could reflect back on my career, I would have done completely different, right? I would have handled it a whole different way.
Were you, I know Jeffries was, and I'd like to think Jeffries is listening too. And Jeffries, if you're listening, shoot me a message so you can vouch for this story. Were you there that night where that one dude came over mock and he was doing like some playful radio call, and I called him on the phone?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Remember?
Yeah, he was.
I was like holding the phone away so I couldn't hear the words he was saying, and I was screaming. Right? Remember that?
Yeah. Yeah. He was using this weird voice or something.
Yeah, he was calling like some weather thing, and I needed to call a guy out the jet to see what the status of the gun install was, because obviously that fucking mattered. Whatever. And he was doing like, it's a balmy 78 degrees at 4,200 feet here at Holloman Air Force Base, Mexico, and we're kicking it live with the weather and I was like constantly trying, and let's put that in perspective. I had to wait 30 seconds to ask my weapons expediter a status update, which, spoiler, it's weapons. There is no update. Right? I lost it.
Right.
It goes back to episode 31. Like, military bearing is such a one-sided thing. You have to have military bearing when you're getting your ass chewed, but there's no real checks and balances on military bearing when you're just fucking totally off the rail.
No. Well, I don't know who brought it up about basic training. Like, the TIs are losing their military bearing. Like, that's the whole basis of it, right? Mm-hmm. being the senior NCO or the ranking individual, you're supposed to keep your calm. You're supposed to keep your cool. You're not supposed to berate these airmen, these young people, and even a chief to a master sergeant or a chief to a senior. You're supposed to keep your cool. That's what military bearing is supposed to represent. Not let me lose my shit whenever I think it's appropriate, right, or wherever I think it's going to impact. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some people that respond very well to criticism, not criticism, but the yelling, the beratement. Some people respond well to that, right? And
I think it's a much lower number than we think.
True, right? Well, I mean, I know me personally. When I was young and I got my ass chewed and yelled at, I responded well to that.
Now,
right?
when you say we responded well, it means you began complying with whatever they're yelling at you about. But later, you manifested the same behavior with the yelling,
True.
right?
But it made me think about the mistake I had made, right?
Sure.
Like seriously think about it, right? It didn't happen often. I wasn't a troublemaker. You're running a mill, average type of airman and stuff.
I would say you're running the mill. I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah, that's a pretty fair.
I always try to have run of the mill guests on.
Yeah, right. You don't want to raise the bar too high, right? So I'll make sure I'll tell Colonel more of that.
Oh, fuck. He listens. I'm going to edit that out. He'll never know.
But yeah, I really, when you're treating someone that way and they don't respond or whatever, you take that one single moment to try and you can make a big difference, right? And like you said, you're screaming and yelling about this guy in mock. Hey, maybe he brought some joy to people over the radio because it was funny, right? But you didn't find it funny at the time. When you blew up and lost your shit all over, and there's other people around, people could hear you outside the office.
Yeah.
Hey, some people reacted well to that, like, oh, get him, Chris McGee or Sergeant McGee. Other people are like, man, what a dick. Like, why has he got to be like that? You just don't know how people are going to react. But man, I'll tell you, that military bearing, that's definitely something that we lose sight of as senior NCOs and people in positions of authority. That's an accurate statement.
And now juxtapose that, like we talked before we started recording, since I retired, I pretty much have not been in a supervisory role just because of the way my post-retirement career kind of went. Now I'm in law school, so, I get to play student or whatever. But you've been a supervisor pretty much since you retired, right? So
right.
I want you to imagine yours and my worst behavior that you can remember us both manifesting. Holloman, for me, certainly was probably the pinnacle. I want you to imagine if that was happening at your job. Right?
Well, let me tell you what, the short and very short, sweet answer to that is I would not have a job.
Right. How long? How long do you think?
Oh, it would be instant.
So would you even get a warning? Like, let's do the phone screaming.
No. No. So let me explain something. And granted, I'm not going to name where I work or anything, but I've had a staff of between 30 to 35 people that report directly to me. So I'm writing their performance appraisals every year. I have a manager that was above me and then a director above him. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then above our director was our vice president and then the CEO of the company. Okay. So there was a time and there was a lady down in my receiving dock, right? So she lost her cool. So me and my manager were on the floor. We were doing our walk around and I had a lead that works for me. So I was kind of like, it'd be like an expediter, I guess.
Right.
And my lead was down there in first stage interacting with this lady. And this lady was like, you could hear her all the way down. She was screaming and yelling. I don't know exactly what about, but then she dropped the F-bomb. She's like, fuck this and fuck that. And my manager was standing there and he's like, did you hear that? I said, I did. And we walked down there and we grabbed her badge and we walked her straight out the door.
Because she was dropping F-bombs?
Yep.
I have an F-bomb in my podcast intro.
Unprofessional behavior, right? So you got to remember, we are working for a corporation.
Yeah. And you represent that.
Absolutely. And we grabbed her badge. He walked her right out the door and ends up, he probably should have taken her to HR first, but he set an example right there on the floor. Yeah. This will not be tolerated, period. Right? You lose your temper, you start swearing and cussing on the floor because the premise is we could have customers, we could have clients on the floor hearing this behavior. So if you're going to invest a couple $1 million in a program in my company and you're walking around and you hear this lady screaming F-bombs, right?
Yeah.
How professional is that?
Yeah.
So she was walked out almost the instant she had said that. There was no asking her to calm down. There was no giving her a second chance.
And you're not a white collar environment, right? Like it's like blue collar. It's right. It's manufacturing of it's something.
Right. It's manufacturing.
Right.
Half my job takes place in a warehouse. The other half takes place in an inspection room.
Yeah.
And it is night and day between what happens with civilians versus what happens in the military. And the behavior you and I and hundreds and thousands of people before us and thousands of people after us absolutely positively does not fly in the civilian sector. There's not even a shred. You can't even make a joke about someone's appearance or anything. You could be fired for it.
I guess the counter argument is the military is engaged with state-sponsored killing, right?
Right.
We have 17 to 40-year-old men doing infantry special forces where their job is to go there and put bullets in all these people. We're training pilots to blow up this and that, where violence, certainly violence is a much greater harm than words, right? So, part of the argument is, well, aircraft maintenance is a tough place and these words you should be strong enough where these words don't matter.
Sure. Right. And that's a fair argument. But if you're looking at, so let's take the Singapore Air Force, for example, right? One time we were TDY in Vegas. Okay. And here it was, Holloman Air Force Base lined up on one ramp and then the Singapore lined up on the next, right? Watching them launch their jets is like watching our Thunderbirds launch.
Yeah.
Okay. When we were doing our Friday launches, right? The guys out there doing the flash dance, Kevin Rollins, one of the funniest shit I ever seen when he cracked the beer when Crystal had her incentive flight. We were turned in by the Singapore Air Force for being unprofessional on the flight line. Now, granted, it's a dangerous environment and I understand that, but hey, look, these guys are out there having some fun.
Yeah.
Why is it acceptable for the United States Air Force to act that way? This other Air Force, they do the same thing we do. They go out there and drop bombs and kill people, right? But like I said, they turned us in and it was the wing commander at the time for Red Flag. He had it out with our OIC and she was really nervous. And of course she calls back to the base and our commander was like, no problem, right? You're good to go. But you see the difference, right? In professionalism and the way you're supposed to conduct yourself and carry yourself. We've made it okay in the maintenance career field you can say the word fuck, right? You're on the flight line turning wrenches. I know you go work for Boeing on the fly line, you turn around and say, fuck, no one's going to turn you in.
But I think there's a big difference between, man, this fucking part sucks. And fuck you, fuck this place, fuck it all. Right. That's different. Right.
Big time. True.
And here's what I would say too. Cause we were at Luke for a long time, not necessarily of our choosing. And I would challenge any AMU out there that you do not do maintenance as well as the Singaporeans.
Right.
I say that with the utmost confidence that what I'm saying is going to be universally accepted to be an objective truth. Anybody that has worked with the Singaporeans but you know what I would argue? They're resourced. They have like 4 or 5 people per jet. They have hydraulic troops. They have engine troops. Engine troops exclusively do the engine runs that are high power.
Right.
Crew chiefs never do. They also are all like E7s, E8s, right? Or a huge chunk of them are.
Isn't their service mandatory?
I don't know if it is, but I also know that coming to America is like the best of the best are chosen.
Right.
From that country, like on a rotation. So like they don't need to drop their pants on a Friday launch because their morale is just maintained organizationally. They don't have to fabricate these outlandish things just to remind the world that they're still alive.
That could be it. It could be, they have newer equipment, better jets, they fly better, they're broke less, they're properly staffed, which is a whole different topic, right? They're funded well, but even though all that may be true and it could equate to it, you can't tell me that we couldn't operate as an Air Force without that kind of behavior, right? You can't say that the fly line wouldn't function properly without Flash Dance Fridays, right? Now, as fun as it is, once again, we're talking about the point of the difference between being in the military and being a civilian. And you brought the point like, hey, even civilian worlds, you're underfunded and understaffed. I mean, right now I got so much work coming out of my ears, right? We're working 12-hour shifts and weekends, right? Granted, the difference is they're getting paid for it, these hourly.
And they can also quit.
Well, they can also say no.
Yep.
Get this.
Oh, that too,
you can say no. Say, I'm not coming in Saturday. So I can put an email to my staff and say, it's mandatory for you to be here on Saturday, right? I get a phone call Saturday morning saying, Eric, I feel sick. I'm not coming in. That's as far as it goes. I can't do anything about it. Right? Okay.
The 21st, they would have a policy that if you requested vacation and they denied it, if you called in sick that day, I think you were like automatically fired. So all it did was it created an incentive of like when I was job hunting in Boston and I was flying Space A, I was because of my my ex-wife's flight benefits because she worked for an airline. Like I was like, which was also so cool because I was so used to the military. I was like, I'm going to fly to Boston on Friday and it's space available and I might not get there and I might not be able to get back. And I don't give a fuck if I don't fucking come back because it's a civilian job. And I would I would never tell them in advance I was asked for the day off because they could say no. And then if I called out sick, I would get fired. I would just surprise them calling out sick.
Right.
Because there's nothing they can do.
And I can almost argue, that I can't say people don't feel the same allegiance to their civilian job as they would in the military, right?
Yep.
So like, I know for a fact if I was one of only 2 engine troops on swing shift and I knew there was a shit ton of work and I called out sick on purpose because I wanted to go fuck off, I would feel really bad for that guy and I probably wouldn't do it, right? I would go into work and suck it up and go into work. As a civilian, though, they don't really think about that when they make these call outs and they say, hey, I'm calling out sick, whatever. They only care about themselves to a certain extent. There are definitely people I work with that have been with the company for 15, 20 years that they'll die for that company, right? Yep. They have the same allegiance to that, but that's the minority, not the majority for sure. And a lot of people use, they move on from career to career and there's no real allegiance where, hey, a lot of hard work as a civilian, you get paid well for it in some jobs. I can't speak for everyone. In the military, a lot of hard work, long hours, but for some difference, the camaraderie and the bond is much stronger in the military than it is as a civilian, right? Overall, generally speaking. So that, that's one thing that allows the culture to kind of develop the way it does because it's a closer bond, right? I feel more comfortable sitting here in front of you saying the word fuck than I would if I sat in front of my manager right now. Right. I wouldn't say that in front of him right now. Right. I don't know him as well, but we definitely worked together a long time for 3 years. Right. Totally different feeling. Right. And I don't know what it is.
Oh, no, actually, that's a good point. Like, I share this podcast on LinkedIn occasionally when it's a less controversial topic or when I'm not calling particular Air Force leaders incompetent fools, or if it's just, like the softer topics. But I'm very self-conscious about how often I drop F-bombs when it's shared there.
Right. Well, it's a more professional environment, right? Like, I'm not saying the military is not professional because there's most definitely a level of professionalism when you're sitting in that production meeting and a colonel walks in and you got chiefs in there and majors and everyone. And like, it should be a professional atmosphere, but it's the same way. You have a meeting in personal, your CEO walks in, your director walks in, the regional director walks in. It's a professional atmosphere. And but it still feels completely different. Yeah, right? It does. And some's good and some's bad. You yelling at that guy on the phone and mock, you're definitely not making that same conversation if it's happening in the civilian world. You're not. You're just not doing it.
Oh, no.
Right? But that. But why is it so different? Why is it acceptable to be like that in the Air Force and the military, but it's not acceptable in the civilian world? You could be doing the exact same job.
Because I think in the military, especially in aircraft maintenance, they give you a lot of fucking latitude if you can produce whatever it is your AFSC is. Because, I mean, think about it. Like, I was, this isn't me like bragging or anything, but I was very often sought after as an expert on F-16s, as a pro super or whatever, even though I'm sure you were probably privy to those conversations. It was, we could get McGee in here, but fuck, man. He brings so much baggage with how fucking angry he is, right?
Well, you know what? I've most definitely sat in a few of those conversations in the 311, right? Especially when I talked about being, pro supers and flight chiefs and who could fill in for what, TDYs and everything. Hey, you're no doubt, Chris McGee got people to produce, right? Certain pro supers can get people to produce, right? Now, whether it's a balance of how the airmen below you respect you or maybe
Or fear you.
yeah, it could be. I mean, there could be a multitude of things, right? You have no idea how they're going to react. It doesn't matter. They don't care how you got them to produce. They just care that the fact that, hey, every time Chris supers on nighttime, we have a full lineup the next day. Jets are all greened up, right? Whether it's a good green up or not, but most of the time it should be if Chris McGee's being a super because you know he's going to question the damn fix no matter what it is. So yeah, you want that guy in charge, but they've turned a blind eye, right? What if you were completely abusive to these people and they were afraid of shit? I'm not going to get Chris on bad side.
Every day there's a meeting in preparation for a meeting, in preparation for a meeting, in preparation for the group meeting.
Yeah.
And at that group meeting, they go through all the aircraft availability. Where are the parts at? What's it waiting on? What's the E-Tech? What do we need? Who's working it? When's it going to be done? What are we looking like for tomorrow? What are we looking like for second go? So, of course, they're going to accept all of my baggage. I mean, we'll just say emotional or mental baggage, whatever you want to fucking label it. Because the only measure of their success in a unit is the slideshow, which is only aircraft availability, period.
Right.
The group commander is not asking, how many of your crew chiefs are going to mental health?
Hey.
How many of your crew chiefs started going to mental health after McGee took over as swing shift super?
Think about this. What if your promotion was based off the rating the people below you gave?
So
right.
I love that idea, but I don't know how that would work in the military where you have command structure and authority. I just don't know.
Right. But I mean, you
think the E4 Mafia is bad now? You have them decide which master sergeant gets promoted.
But maybe not that far down. But think about it. Let's say if you took a senior master sergeant who was the assistant superintendent for AMU, right?
So let's just throw out. I don't know. I wrote a story called "When a Leader's a Shit Leader" and "When a Leader's a Shit Leader" Part 2. If you want to use that particular person and that maybe scenarios as a good base for this hypothetical, you can pause the podcast, go back and read it or whatever. I highly recommend it. Good stories with audio as well. But continue, Eric. Sorry.
Great stories.
Great.
Let's say you take that specific individual as a senior master sergeant, and the commander, the colonel or the major, whoever has to look at his package and promote him, decide to promote him or not. The board he goes up to. I want to go and talk to the 6 master sergeants that he supervises directly. And there should be a whole bunch of different, a weapons guy, an engines guy, a crew chief, who knows? It could be a guy in debrief, right? It could be, who knows? You get and sit there and talk to them to get a real feel about how this person is as a leader, right? And then you couple that with the AMU stats and how well they're doing. And, she had awards and all that crap that goes along with promotion. But I would be shocked if that guy actually didn't even lose a stripe. If someone actually took the time to talk to the people he directly supervised, I would. If that was the case, if that's how he got promoted, he would be a master sergeant. They would take a stripe from that guy based off the feedback from the individuals below him. That speaks volumes. Now, when your people below you are saying, "Man, this guy is awesome. He does whatever he can for me," and they give these stories, "Hey, this guy was, he took me home one night when my wife divorced me, and he did this, he did that. He stayed late with us. He helped us install this engine, blah blah blah." That's the guy. That's the guy that you want moving up, that people respect.
I wonder how different my behavior would have. Well, besides the fact that I was mostly not concerned with promotion, but let's pretend I was, right?
Sure. Yeah.
I wonder how different my behavior would have been if all my expediters decided my performance report.
I wouldn't say specifically that they would decide your performance report, but it definitely would have.
Yeah, contribute to the data points.
Right. I think your behavior might have been modified slightly, but you are who you are. But think about if that change is kind of instilled where they actually take feedback from the people that you directly supervise, or maybe you're a lead super and you only have 2 guys you directly supervisors or 3 guys, maybe take people below them. But I think your behavior would have been altered a little bit, but you are who you are, right? And we all know people do certain things to get promoted, and that's the only reason they do them, right? Mm-hmm. We all know people, hey, I'm gonna go volunteer and lead the wing promotion ceremony because I want to try and make senior chief or something, right? Some people are strictly motivated by that, but I feel like you may have walked on a little more eggshells and been a little more courteous, and maybe actually tried to grow your people and get them to respect you a different way than through fear.
Well, in fairness, I thought I was good and I mean, I knew I had some issues, but
well, you had a pass, right? You had a pass, and I'm saying this. You had a pass because you were so good, and people respected you because you were so good at your job.
Mm-hmm.
So if picture you as a weapons guy running a crew chief office, right? Or running the flight line as a weapons guy. I'm not saying they couldn't do it, but your knowledge for the entire aircraft and how it worked and how everything should be, regulations, and they respected you for that for sure, right? Hey, Sergeant McGee, you can't go up there with some bullshit fix with Sergeant McGee. He's going to sit down and he's going to look at it. That's a respectable point for them to look at for you. But then again, oh, don't screw up. Sergeant McGee is going to give it to you, right?
Yeah.
And it could be an honest mistake. Hey, Sergeant McGee, I dropped the socket into the engine bay, right? And all of a sudden you're
because it's all the other things, and I'm just looking at, and you're just the physical manifestation of all my other shit I'm angry about that is nebulous. They're going to funnel that shit right into you.
Picture the same respect they have for you or whoever, because your expertise in maintenance and how good you are at your job. And then you take away that fear and add a little more respect. Hey, Sergeant McGee, he didn't jump down my shit when I dropped the socket. He helped us look for it. He was cool about it. He got the other guys to understand it was a mistake, and we're all here for each other, right? What if that was the case? You would be unstoppable, really. I mean,
what's so bizarre, especially in my career, and I'm not even sure what this adds to the conversation, but I think it's important because after episode 30 and 31, I don't want to be misconstrued as a fucking raging psychopath.
Right. No,
but like what you're describing, there's a lot of people that worked for me that thought I was smart and also had and have like undying respect for how I treated them, took care of them as a leader. I just don't, I think I was definitely Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde for sure. Right. I was a totally different person for each person.
And as a leader, I can't remember what episode I was talking about with this, but everyone reacts different to leadership, right? Yeah. We talked about earlier, some people respond well to maybe being berated, or, some people, oh my gosh, I'm gonna let them down, right? I'm gonna let my supervisor down. I'm gonna let the team down. I hear the word team a lot now that I'm out, right? The word team comes up all the time. Great job, team. And it, to me, being ex-military, it feels a little superficial and a little bullshit to me. But to them, it's not. It's, hey, we are a team. We're in this together, right? And they maybe don't understand the true meaning of team, being a team member. But regardless, you never see them break away from giving other people credit so much. There's not a lot of, and I can only speak from my personal experience right now, but there's not a lot of me, because you get paid to do a certain job, and you have to apply for other jobs, and you get promoted based on your work and who you are. But awards and all that crap, that means nothing, right, in the civilian sector. But imagine now you think back in your career, and you take people leaders like this, you think back and say, hey, I was really good at my job. I was technically proficient. I was the expert. People trusted my opinion on that. Also, I really genuinely care about this guy and gal. Also, I understand that everyone reacts a little different to different leadership styles, and treating everyone the same by blowing up at them when they're an idiot, right? That doesn't work. Mm-hmm. It doesn't fit the mold for all people. And not knowing your people and how they respond to different things. I mean, we all could lay out, we could name 10 guys off the top of our head that are, hey, they're fine with getting berated. They're fine with getting their ass chewed, right? And they'll come back and they're not going to worry about it. It's not going to bother them, right? They'll just learn from their mistake and they'll move on, right? We also could name probably double the amount of people that would just totally put them in their shell. Yep. I mean, we've made people cry on the flight line before, Chris, right? Literally cry, like grown men, right? We don't allude to them as grown men, but they're grown men. They're 25, 26-year-olds, and they're bawling their eyes out, right? Because of something we said or did to them. Yep. I had a female. She was losing her shit, and she was bawling her eyes out. She was obviously stressed and overwhelmed, right? And I completely disregarded all that, right? I don't give a shit. I'm like, we bring up military bearing. I said, stop losing your military bearing in front of these people.
It's so fucking terrible.
Meanwhile, I'm screaming and yelling at her.
Yeah.
Right. And I look back on that instant and I feel absolutely terrible that happened, and I could never do that to this day to, a civilian. First of all, like I told you, I'd get fired for sure. But secondly, they're human beings, right? They're not a machine. They're not there just to produce that jet. Everyone, you go home, you got a whole different life going on. Right. So there's what's going on in the flight line.
There's also, I've heard that the high stakes of aircraft maintenance, where if you cut a corner, if you do something wrong, someone can very well die. Either the guy next to you because you didn't torque down the tank and it fell off when you dropped the dolly and now they're crushed to death, or the pilot, or anything else. That is a sufficient justification to every once in a while ripping somebody a new asshole because they need to up their standards in order to not kill someone.
I don't think that's a valid argument. And I'll tell you why. There's plenty of civilian jobs out there where people's lives are in danger, right? You work on electrical components of aircraft that get installed and you're not paying attention to that circuit board and it fries and causes a fire. And, you could allude to 1,000 different scenarios where you're putting people's lives at risk, right? Even down to the auto mechanic who's doing your brakes.
That's fair.
Right? He fucks your brakes up or doesn't, and you're dead. You go through an intersection, you're toast, right? You can't use that as an excuse because the high stress of the job. I mean, police officers and firemen and, even doctors.
In fairness, police officers are yelling all the fucking time.
That's true. That's true.
But you know what? I don't think firemen are. I think they're only yelling over the sirens and the sound of the blaze.
That's true.
It's also like, what is their intent? They're like, come with me if you want to live. I know I'm quoting Arnold Schwarzenegger here, but like, that's what they're saying. They're probably yelling, but it's totally different than when it's somebody that has authority and anger and rage yelling at you and you can't escape that.
Right. I think there is maybe a certain level of pass based on the stressors of the job. Right. Mm-hmm. But the stress of the job should not be an automatic pass for the behavior exuded during the job. Right.
So I would argue that the more the Air Force mismanages aircraft maintenance, and I can't rehash all the things, but if this is the first time listening to this podcast, fucking start over.
Yeah.
Listen and then come back. But doesn't the Air Force have an onus, or doesn't the Air Force have a responsibility that as they mismanage the fleet and they mismanage the entire maintenance apparatus and they cause widespread stress on every fucking maintainer, doesn't that eventually create some sort of justification for everybody walking around all keyed up?
Well, no, it may be a reason, but not an excuse.
That's fair.
Right. Now, what I know we've talked about this in the past too, mental health to people in the Air Force, right, or any branch of the military should be almost a top priority. I don't give a shit if you can run around the track in 20 minutes, and you got a beer belly, right? If you're a crew chief or an engine guy, I don't give a shit about that.
I don't give a fuck. Nope.
But if you're mentally incapable or you're carrying around this baggage all day and you're going to lose it one day, and look, it causes way more problems than just yelling at someone and swearing at them. Sleep deprivation, you forget a step. We talk about how dangerous it is in the flight line. Now, me personally, I never really felt that danger where like, man, it could be wrong, but I worked on engines and bearings and test cells and, all the aircraft, maybe because I always did my job the way it was supposed to get done. Right. But if I didn't torque that panel down or that, those 500 screws on a panel or the augmenter nozzle, if I didn't use a torque wrench and all those, I'm not losing any sleep at night, put it that way. But we've seen it. People, they get tired, they get complacent, they're stressed. And, I think at Holloman, someone got sucked up in that gear, right? It was a late night and they were working hard and, who knows how many hours they were out there. That could have easily been, I just totally forgot where I was. I missed a step. And it's human nature. People forget things and the Air Force needs to deal with that quickly. They got to find a way to make sure people's mental health is up to par, because that job in the flight line, if you're not there in your head, you walk in front of an intake and see ya, right? Or maybe you forget a flashlight up there and it gets sucked up and you don't follow your procedures and you ruin a whole engine, right? I mean, 1,000 things could happen, but we do a terrible job with that.
Well, what we do is we teach resiliency.
No, we don't. Wait, what? Because there was a PowerPoint?
Well, I guess how do you develop resiliency? And I'll tell you what, Curtis is listening right now and he's like, this motherfucker introduced the topic I've been trying to talk about for a month to Stromski. Fuck you, Chris. Like Curtis has told me offline, he's like, the Air Force is terrible with resiliency. We try to teach it as this sort of sterile academic sort of thing. And the reality is resiliency, and I'm paraphrasing, and I promise he'll be on a day after this episode airs. Resiliency is through experience. and being able to be tested in adverse places and succeeding, relying on processes and systems and people to support you to get through that difficult thing. And you come out the other side and you look back and go, I did it, I can do it, and I can do more next time. And that's how resiliency is built, right? It's not from slideshows. It's not from, mind meditation and mindfulness. I mean, those are all great things, but that's the barbecue at the end of the week. That only works when you're already healthy and you're adding a little bit more to it. Like, we've been in that unit as a fucking dumpster fire of a bunch of selfish, idiotic leaders that behind closed doors treat people like they're expendable, stupid, and their emotions are an inconvenience.
Right.
Like, we work for those people, and then they'll turn around and go, we need to do a burger burn this Friday. And it's like, you know what? I wish you would just fucking be a human being and treat people with respect and fuck the burger burn. So resiliency training is the burger burn, where you're not doing the real work, which is giving your people the necessary infrastructure that they can be resilient. And maybe that's why I get so fucking angry at all the resiliency bullshit. Because it's like, on the one hand, the Air Force is giving you this horrible fucking environment that's mismanaged. And then they're not even giving you like a real foundation for resiliency. They're slapping, just whatever together.
Let me tell you what, being out for about almost 3 years now, I had never felt so much pressure in my 3 years than I ever did in the military. I felt so much pressure in the military for so many different aspects: promotion, sorority generation, even down to morning meetings, right? Having been prepared for the morning meetings. The stress level when you get out, you have your family to take care of, and you got to earn a paycheck, right? Yep. And let's just boil it down to like your basic needs, right? You got to eat, you got to have shelter and clothing. Man, it's much different because I know that I go to work, do my job for X amount of hours, and I don't, not in every job, but you don't have to take it home. Yep. The Air Force, it's a lifestyle. It's everything you are. And it's something you constantly think about. And think about when you get out, right? You go to parties at your friend's house and you go to relax and drink a few beers. What do you guys end up talking about? Work, or this certain person, or something that happened.
What are we doing now, Eric?
Right. Well, true. This is different though, because
loser.
Yeah, true. I told you the bar's not very high, right?
That's fair. So,
yeah. But I just feel like the amount of stress and the overall environment and the way people choose or taught to lead people, and it just goes round and around and around and around. And it's like, how do you break the cycle? Imagine a chief telling the ops commander, we're not flying this many sorties, period. I'm not doing it, right? We're not working these long hours. We're not doing this. We're going to take this month and get healthy. When have you ever we saw a glimpse of that in the 311th with Colonel Chisholm, right? And when we were just kind of like on the same page about ops and, everything. But man, that's really rare to have that, and you talked about how sorority generation has stayed the same or gone higher, where Manning's gone down, iron's getting old. That all adds up quickly. And you can't, how do you teach these people to deal with that and be successful over and over and over again? And you're just putting that same stress on the exact same generation that came before you and the generation that's coming after you. It just trickles down over and over. Something's got to change eventually. I don't understand how we can just keep going like this. I just don't.
You mentioned that, and it certainly happens in maintenance, and that was where the vast majority of my career was, besides a few little short stints in, it was still maintenance, but
Pim, baby.
The pinnacle of my career, product improvement manager. I tell you what product I improved? The gym at Holloman is what I improved.
Right. And your putting got a lot better too.
That's fair. So maintainers, when we get together, especially like swing shifters, it seems like even more so when there's a house party or whatever, we talk about work the whole time.
Right.
And I suspect that this podcast is essentially the same thing.
It is.
And I think part of what I'm doing is I'm trying to make sense of that because most of the time when you're a bunch of maintainers on a Saturday drinking beers at 7 o'clock in the morning because you're swing shifters and that's like your 7 p.m. and there's like 6 of you sitting around and you're talking about work, what you're talking about is what was terrible, why was it terrible, who's good, what's good, who do you like working for, what went right, what jet did you fix, what was the fix, how did you find that fix? It's literally just sitting around and you're trying to make sense of all this data since the last time you got to like really churn through it. Because the reality is when you got your foot on the gas Monday through Saturday or whatever, and you have all these competing interests, you don't have time to reflect on what the culture is like, what work is like, besides those few smoke pit little stops here and there and these sort of things where you get some heavy. I mean, part of the reason I used to love to do heavy maintenance is I'm in the hangar. It's not noisy necessarily. It's me and like one or two other people. We're sitting down and we're doing this big complex task and we just get to talk and listen to Metallica or something. We get to talk, get to know them. You want to pick that person that is good at maintenance, but also is not a fucking weirdo, which goes back to the Bible thing. I mean, you'll still take the guy that's good if that's all you got. But, part of that is, I think what you're talking about, boy, such a good point, Eric. I think the mental health vacuum that people in maintenance experience, I think they're basically, they're doing a social patchwork, putting together these little informal conversations to try to work through how terrible it is in this moment at this time and just make sense of it.
I think it's a big dump, right?
It is.
I lived in a house with two or three other guys when I was in, my 20s, and they were engine guys, and one guy worked the flight line, two of us worked at test cell, right? And I remember him, he would come home, especially the flight line guy. The test cell, look, that was the best fucking job I ever had in my life, right? Test cell was it was great. You worked hard, but yet, man, we had some good times. But the guy from the flight would come home and he would just dump, right? Like all the shit that happened in the flight line that day. This guy was being an asshole. This jet broke here, talking about troubleshooting. I mean, we talked about all kinds of shit, and he would just use it to dump, but that's all he ever talked about, right? Yep. We come home and he would just always just dump. And I know, especially as you get later in your career, Nina and Jim had a lot of parties at their house, right?
Yep.
We would be back there and, they're 314s, we were 311s. And we would talk a lot about work and about individuals. And then I think it's a great conversation to have, but
it's also one-dimensional,
right?
Because you don't have another outlet to process it.
You don't have money. You may not even have time.
That's
right?
True.
And secondary, you hope for the people you're talking to are going through the same shit you are.
Validating.
Right. And then, hey, look, let's talk about it. The amount of booze that you drink and the stuff that comes in during these conversations. And it just, you're all of a sudden you're upset and pissed when you get off of work. And so you start drinking or whatever, and you can either get more pissed, right? Or you have the opposite effect where you just turn all mellow and everything. But most of my experience, people get more angry as the night goes on, as the more they drink and everything. And that all cycles back to, like I told you, it's a big giant circle, right? It's a huge circle. I don't know. It's crazy to me to think that you do something like work in the Air Force for 20 plus years. And, the fact that more people aren't just going to mental health, in the later stages of their career, like all day. Right. And I don't think my career was even that tough really, but I can, you tell the story about the poor guy the one he told me before we got on the podcast here, dealing with that kind of stuff, right? Shooting people and roadside bombs and everything. Yeah. Imagine that. Right. And we're just talking about maintenance, but it's really bad too. Like it's your reality at the time. You can't compare it to someone else's job.
Well, you know what? So this is why for me, it almost feels worse. And I can't remember if I've digested this before, but like if you're in the military and you're in a kinetic job, meaning that there's a chance that, you carry a gun and you go into places that are dangerous. I feel like if you look at an Army squad that's going from house to house in Fallujah, kicking in doors, and one of your guys gets blown away by an insurgent, and you fucking waste that guy or whatever, and you try to get him back, and you bury him, and you do like the battlefield cross and everything back at your forward operating base, or whatever it is, they go back out that next day. Like they don't stop because they know that in their job, death is an absolute inevitability, either the death of the enemy or the death of one of yours, and you just got to be better to make sure it's them, right? So I kind of make it, I kind of think of it almost as akin to a car accident. Like when I'm driving my car on the highway, especially now that it's snowing, and I can use that because it's snowing fucking everywhere. So, you know, this is a relatable story now because the entire fucking country is in snow. I know there's a chance that a semi could cross over, and in an instant, I'm going to be dead, right?
Right.
And me dying, it's like, that's just the way it was, you know. But I see the flight line where it's this prolonged environment where it's just really unhealthy. And you can see it when people are coming to work and they look like a fucking corpse and they're just dragging. And you know they're probably drinking on the weekends or drinking, who knows, and their give a shit factor's low, and it's just they're fucking dragging their body in the building, you know? And you see it everywhere as everybody's getting beat down. And then one of them kills themselves.
Oh yeah.
Right? I equate that to cancer. Like it's really different watching someone go from a healthy person to months where they're just wasting away and then they die. That's a totally different experience. And I don't mean to sound callous, but somebody that enters a kinetic career field, they understand the bargain they're making is death is a possibility, and they go in that with open eyes. No one in infantry is going to be surprised if they have to kill someone or there's someone trying to kill them. That is the nature of the job. But it's so different watching it in maintenance where death, at no time, unless I thought I was fucking up or a freak of nature, did I think that death was a cost of business for aircraft maintenance. And when I see the anecdotal evidence, because nobody will give me the real evidence of the suicides and maintenance, and I see that culture that I walked away from, you know, what is it, like 3 years now that we've been retired, it's like watching a bunch of hospice care where they're just squeezing the last little bit of productivity out of this fucking exhausted population without concern for their well-being.
And think about this. The smallest changes in maintenance, right? I feel like it could have a huge impact, a positive impact, right? So like you hit the nail on the head, you know, those people that take those jobs, they join the army, they join, you know, whatever these dangerous jobs, you know, they go out, they understand, hey, this is what I signed up for. When you joined as a crew chief, did you know that you'd be working the freaking crazy hours, under the stress you were working? Did you picture that as an airman? No, I thought I'd be working on engines. Like, hey, you know, I'm going to be working on an engine. Like, who thought that?
My recruiter was an F-16 crew chief. So first of all, fuck him, because he could have told me. Like, it's not like I had like a weather guy that became a recruiter. He was an F-16 crew chief, and he's like, yeah, it's great, travel the world, all this stuff.
Liars.
I remember, boy, I remember it vividly. There was a guy, Andy Eisenberg, who is a fucking fantastic dude, and he got out after his first enlistment because Andy's smarter than me,
all of us,
you, and anybody listening to this fucking podcast.
Right.
Andy got out after his first enlistment, but I remember in tech school he was a red rope, but it wasn't the typical red rope. I think he was just a real cool dude, and he just got it. But he was like 1 or 2 classes ahead of me in tech school. So like that was like 2 weeks to 4 weeks, which felt like a fucking eternity in tech school because it was like a phase ahead or whatever. But he got to Luke before me, and I was, you know, a month or two behind. And I remember the first day I walked up to the 310th. I was walking by the smoke pit, and Andy was sitting on the table smoking, and he was head to toe filthy, and he had bags under his eyes. And I was like, and this is way back in the day where you didn't know people's first name. Like you legitimately didn't learn people's first names for like the first years of career. I was like, hey, Eisenberg, what's up? And he literally looked at me, and he didn't even see me or recognize me or know me. And he just looked like after 2 fucking months, he was just cooked. And I was like, Jesus Christ, like what the fuck happened to him? And it was very much a foreshadowing of like, yeah, you're going to work and it's just going to fucking drain you. I'm not necessarily saying that the flight line isn't hard and people don't need to work long hours and do hard work. The point is We need to be asking only what's required, not fucking everything out of these people.
That's what I was saying. Like the smallest change, right, could have a huge impact on this entire culture and this entire circle that we've been talking about. And look, there's a lot of different things, and the Air Force is gigantic. It's huge, right? And I can't even pretend what it would be like to make decisions on that magnitude for an entire branch of service. But let me tell you, small decisions made every day, small decisions made in the moment, right? We talked about the moment earlier. It could have a huge impact on an individual or a group or a squadron. And that guy that sat there that was defeated after 2 months in the Air Force, he didn't think that was going to be his life when he joined the Air Force. And most people are bright-eyed and bushy-tailed coming out of high school. I'm assuming most people, they have this grand, you're going to be a weapons guy. You're going to be a hydraulics guy, an electrician. How cool is that, right? Man, did they know what they were getting into? And it's kind of a shock, right? And I think it's gotten worse and worse and worse. And, hey, is this necessary? Do we need to fly this many sorties? How are we going to get the most bang for our buck? Going up to Congress, ask for money for better iron, or, hey, there's all kinds of decisions that can be made that can improve this overall. But it still takes that one decision made by Tech Sergeant McGee or Stromski or whoever you are in the moment that could change, could have a huge impact, right? And like I told you earlier, changes happen in the moments, in seconds. They don't happen, there's big changes that happen, but it takes one person, it takes one thing sometimes to have this huge impact and this lasting effect, right? And you just never know what that is, what it's going to be. Don't get me wrong. I don't think people need to work hard. People got to go out there and you got to bust ass and you got to do what it takes to get the job done, and you got to put up with some shit sometimes, right? But the key term is sometimes, right? When you put up with shit all the time and every, months and months on end, and it never gets any better, and Manny never gets any better, and leadership never changes, and man, what's there left to work for, right? What's the point? And I can see how people get to that point, right?
So normally I end the podcast with a request for final thoughts. I'm going to do something different now.
Sure.
What would you change, or what would you enact? What would you do if you were the Chief Master on the Air Force, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, the Secretary of the Air Force, any one of those particular people? Let's say you had a magic wand and you could change one thing in the Air Force without any sort of no policy revisions or anything, like just ding, and that was it. What would you do? Infinite resources, whatever you want.
That's a tough question, right? When you brought that up, the first thing that came to my head and the first thing that popped in would be, I'm not quite sure how I would do it or what I would do, but I would definitely change the promotion system, right? I think changing the way people get promoted and why they get promoted and who gets promoted, that would have a huge impact on decisions that are made for the Air Force down the road, right? So you take that senior master sergeant at AMU that now is a chief or could be a command chief one day or who knows what, right? You take him and he is not promoted to that position, right? It could have a huge impact and changes. And we talked about this podcast, who's it reaching, and how's it having an effect? Am I having a big enough effect? Like I told you, I think sometimes it takes one person. It takes one person to hear this or see this or change what they're doing. You'll never know the impact, Chris, right? You'll never know.
I know.
But I think if I was one of those people, I would revamp the entire promotion system. I would I would gut it and rebuild it, and to ensure that the right people are getting promoted, which in turn should mean they're grooming the people below them. And once again, that snowball effect takes effect, and it just has a good cycle, right? That's the first thing that popped in my mind. Of course, I could say, less sorties and more aircraft and better tools, and but the promotion, I mean, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build young men and young women for the future to be productive members of society. Boy, how productive are you when you get spit out of the Air Force because you've been in maintenance for 6 years and your back's all fucked up and you're half drunk and your wife divorced you? How is that a productive member of society when you get out? Right? You're not.
So that was a good answer. It wasn't the right answer. The right answer is
Your answer?
you would give Chris McGee all of his FOIA requests on suicide numbers, sorties flown, fleet health, ARI referrals, mental health referrals, Article 15s, all of that. That was the correct answer.
That's on the agenda. It's on the agenda, right? So we'll get to it when we get to it, Chris.
I'll tell you what, you're right. I'll tell you why you're right. If we promote the right people long enough, then eventually we'll get the right people in the positions that I'm doing FOIA requests for, and they'll actually give me the fucking data. So
Right.
you got the big brain. You got the long-term look. All right, Eric.
Right. Okay.
Like I said, standard ops, if anything strikes your fancy, let me know. We'll fire it up and do another episode. Like, you're the most popular guest. So,
Must be my low bar, right?
Yeah, I don't know why. I don't know why that is. So, all right. Other than that, thanks a lot, and adios.